All right. Hey, hey, hey. It is Rebecca Simon Peter coming to you live with a special edition of Leadership Mojo. I am so excited on this Women's History Month day, Wednesday, to share with you two really amazing guests that I have joining me today. And let me take this moment to bring in Reverend Bessie Hamilton, who is the Associate Director of Connectional Ministries for Multi Ethnic Initiatives in the Oklahoma Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Welcome, Bessie. I'm so glad to have you here today. And welcome to the Reverend Dr. Jacqui King, who is the Director of Ministerial Excellence for the Illinois Great Rivers Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. Welcome to you, Jacqui. Thank you so much for being here. What a pleasure to have these two powerhouse women for today's Women's Journey to Ministry, kicking it with three resilient women of faith. And I'm humbled and proud to include myself in this great company with Reverend Bessie Hamilton and Reverend Dr. Jacqui King. I'm Rebecca Simon Peter, by the way. I'm the author of the upcoming book, Forging a New Path, Moving the Church Forward in a Post-Pandemic World. Are we there yet? In a post-pandemic world. And I am the founder and developer of Creating a Culture of Renewal, which is a 3-year group coaching community that empowers churches and their leaders to dream like Jesus. So here we are. We are three women, and we're friends. We're sisters. We are women who have a lot in common. And Jacqui and I have been knowing each other for, 5 years, 10 years maybe. Bessie and I for a couple of years. But when you meet somebody and you just know this person and I have a lot in common, like our souls are connected, our stories have overlap, and there's just something here that resonates and pulls us together. So if you don't know Reverend Dr. Jacqui King, or if you don't know Reverend Bessie Hamilton, let me just tell you a little bit about these two women. Then we're gonna kick it, and we're just gonna share with each other as we talk about our life journeys and the ways in which we have been called into ministry. But here's some words I think about with Jacqui. Bold, bold leadership. If you know Jacqui, you know those words fit. Bold leadership, deep listening, and engaged in community. Jacqui used to work with a general board of discipleship, now Discipleship Ministries. That's where you and I first met. Those words totally described you and when we've been together in person. And Bessie is a woman of resilience, determined, persevering, overcoming all kinds of obstacles to make a difference in the world, and just really standing on the promises of God, staying focused on what's ahead. Now, sometimes when you hear the words persistent and resilience, you may think about somebody with a furrowed brow and a little bit of worry and anxiety. That's not Bessie. No, joy in the heart. Look at that smile. Joy in the heart, and just this knowing that God is in the blessing business. So I'm so pleased to have the both of you. Why don't we just kick it off with, tell us about your early history. What sort of processes shaped your identity, shaped your faith? Just tell us a little bit about that. Jacqui, we'll kick it off with you and tell us a little, and we'll go from there.
Rebecca, thank you for such an amazing introduction, and I am truly blessed to be with you and Reverend Bessie today. Something that I would say has kicked off my life was family and education, as well as resilience. Early on in my education, my family basically said, "You'll be going to college." And, we were the first generation, my sister and I, to graduate from high school and go to college, complete college. So in the fourth grade, which, you're about 10 years old, I knew I was going to go to college, and I had already declared that I would get a doctorate. Now, what I was going to get it in, wasn't really critical. I just knew that I would get it. But in that family environment, I think the big thing, my faith, not only my community, but the fact that we were going to have to break down some doors and spaces. So busing was a way that education entered my next level of living. And literally in the second grade, I was bused. And by the fourth grade, I was going to school on public transportation. So I tell people I know how to move through lots of spaces, and my family has always been with me as I move through.
That's amazing. And you grew up in Philly, right?
Grew up in Philly, graduated from Philadelphia High School for Girls, long-standing tradition for empowering women to go forward into their dreams, and amazing sisters that I've graduated with, and we stayed connected. But Girls High has a long history of producing amazing women in leadership.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love that your family was like, you're going to college, and you're like, yep, and I'm going to get a doctorate.
Yes,
Our paths crossed when we talked about busing. Now, I didn't grow up in Philly. I grew up in Connecticut, but I was in one of those communities, primarily white, that had kids bussed in. And we had
yes,
kids bussed in from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Now, if you don't know me, folks, born and raised Jewish. So I was one of the few Jewish kids in all of my grades growing up. And so I was in a minority status in that way. My life changed for the better, I would say, the day that the kids from Bridgeport started coming to our schools, because it opened up a whole world for me that I think I'd always been eager for. Being a minority kid, I was really sensitive to that. I was really sensitive to like, and who else is out there? Like, where are my people? And as you and I spoke, Jacqui, about this, when the African American kids from Bridgeport started coming to Wilton, Connecticut, I'm trying to think. I think it was like sixth or seventh grade on through high school. Those are the kids that were my friends. Those were the kids I had the crushes on, and that was just such an important part of my multicultural, I'd say multi-ethnic growing up. I grew up with a Italian dad, Italian Catholic, Jewish mom, and our world was always sort of variegated and multi-hued, and we yearned for that because we were not wasps. I just want to say that my dad was always so clear: we are not wasps. Okay. And I didn't even like know what that meant, but it's like, okay, we are not wasps. Then I found out that was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I thought, yep, I'm not any of those, and I'm never going to be. Now here I am, a United Methodist minister. But when I was a kid, I was thinking, I'm going to be a rabbi. I'm going to be a rabbi. I didn't know how. Sort of like rabbi, reverend. There was a little twisteroo in there, but that's a God thing. You get an idea and then God fleshes it out. So I've just loved the connection, Jacqui, that you and I have around the impact of busing in our lives, both of us.
and I will say this, Rebecca, not only the busing, but I will say the diversity. When you are bused and you are changing the environment, but then as you proceed forward, you're always looking for the person that you can make that connection with. And that
Yep.
connection for me has always been diverse group of people. By the time I got to fourth grade,
Yeah.
one best friend was Jewish, another best friend was Turkish, another best friend was Italian, and then it was me. And it was the era of Charlie's Angels. So we had decided that we weren't necessarily Charlie's Angels, but we were a unique crew. And we wore Turkish puzzle rings. That was our connecting to each other. And we went from where we were, at that school, which was Masterman, and then went on to Girls High together. And some of them were into arts and dance and drama and things, but we were unique in knowing who we were. So
Yeah.
even though, we were bused and how we got there, when we got on the ground, the point was, we're going to connect and change the world. So you can imagine again, in the fourth grade, bold leadership was like, we're going to run businesses, we're going to, take over the world, and we're going to do all these things. And it didn't register that you're a girl.
Yeah. Right.
It registered that we're going to take over the world because we're brilliant, we're amazing, and
Right, right, right. I think it was so similar to so much of what I have experienced as well. Growing up in rural Alabama, busing was an automatic. It was just a part of the culture. Everybody, was on the bus, and so it was not anything that was different than, it was all that we had experienced. But I think, just thinking about what you said about knowing, even with my parents, I grew up, my father's a Baptist preacher. My mother stayed at home. I have seven siblings, 6 older, 1 younger. And even with my parents, and they married at age 16 and 18,
Wow.
and married now for about 63 years.
Mm.
But even just understanding their history and not really finishing high school, but they made sure that at every turn, that was something that they pushed in our household, that you're going to go to college. All 8 of us went to college, graduated from college, and we were determined yet and still to be something, to do something great, even in a place where, it was a very impoverished community. But yet and still, I was that little girl. I was always dreaming. I didn't, just like Jacqui, I didn't know what. I wanted a doctorate, and hopefully in the next month or so, May 12th, I will finish a doctorate. And it was always something that I have wanted to do. But I think, it is this determination that you have, even in the midst of poverty, and even in the midst of seeing so much terrible things going on around, but still determined to want to do something great with your life. And so I'm just so thankful. It was a very country setting environment where my dad, had a garden, and people would come by, and he would give fruit and vegetables, and everybody played together, and my mom cooked cakes and cookies and all of that. So it was almost an environment where I didn't even realize the poverty that I'd lived in until sometime later, because it was just that impactful and loving and caring. People just took care of each other. And so I'm just so excited when I hear, our similar stories from 3 different states, but so similar with some of the things that we experience.
Absolutely. Really different backgrounds. Well,
Right.
Bessie, you've got such a great story about your call to ministry. So tell us a little bit about that. You grew up in a Baptist faith. Your dad was a Baptist preacher. How'd you become
Yeah.
United Methodist? Tell us about
Well,
that.
it's so interesting because at 18, I was headed to college. I had been working in my dad's church, and I knew, that I was called to ministry, but I did not understand it. I knew that there was this tugging on my heart, and I knew I cared a lot about people. I was always going behind everybody else, making sure that person was okay. And so it was at that moment at 18, and I went to the people around me and I said, I think I may be called to ministry, but I don't know what that means. And I remember them saying, you are a woman, you are not called. You are to go to
Mm,
college, and you're going to be a teacher. And that's exactly what I did. I didn't, and at the time, I knew that it was his calling, but at the same time, I respected and loved the people around me so much. So I trusted them to say, this is what you're going to do. And you can still make a difference in the world. You can still love on people. You can love on children. You can do all of these amazing things. And that's exactly what I did. And so for about 18 years, knowing that I was called to ministry, married my husband at 24, who was a United Methodist pastor. And
wow.
so, yeah, so that's kind of how it came into play. Grew up in the Baptist church, married a United Methodist pastor. My dad said, what are you doing? And he
Right?
finally realized that I was adamant about being married to this man and this pastor. And it was during that time with my husband that I went back and I said to him, I think I may be called to ministry. And so we spent that time, I thought, being just like we do, wives in the church, pastors' wives, you're over children's ministry, and you're
Right.
given all these roles, that you're supposed to do. And I played them and enjoyed it, and all of that, and had hoped that doing children's ministry and leading women's ministry, that would be enough, that this call to ministry would fade away, and that I would just work in the church. And of course, it didn't. It was still that tugging throughout. And so 18 years from the time at 36, I answered a call to ministry. It was a
Mm.
long time coming. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Bessie, did you hope that that was going to be enough because you didn't want to go against your dad? Or what was that
Definitely.
about?
Yes, I think definitely. I had hoped. that would be enough, because I knew where I had grown up, that women in ministry, I mean, that was not a part of the affirmation. I mean, just didn't happen. And so it was almost as if you were out of God's will in some way. And
Yeah.
so even knowing that I was called, it was a burden. And I honestly wanted it to go away, because I didn't want to go against my father, but I just didn't want to, I didn't want to be doing something that was out of order, or that went against, women being in
Mm.
ministry, or what I had been taught.
Mhm.
And so it was hard, initially, even after answering the call to ministry, still feeling a bit unsettled and insecure in the call, but
Yeah.
still just kind of staying with it. And thank God I did.
Yeah, I mean, look at you now, girl. You've really made good. You're appointed to these high position multi-ethnic initiatives, and clearly God knew what God was doing there with you.
Blows me away. It does. It blows me away. And I think that's a part of it, that even when you don't know what you're doing, and I'll be honest, going in it feeling a bit fearful, but trusting God with it all. And God has a way of just making it all okay. And that's what I see now, in my life. I'm often amazed. It's almost like I wake up and I pinch myself, like, you're really here? I mean, you really did it, you're
Right.
here doing ministry, it blows me away sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and that's an old ploy. Marry the guy, he'll get it done, and then I won't have to really, like, step into my call. I remember when I was still in the Jewish community, born and raised Jewish, Reform, and then I became an Orthodox Jew because I had a was before the Jesus vision, I had a God vision that moved me into the Orthodox community, and so I married a guy. And in the Orthodox community, you may not know, in Judaism, there's often a mechitza, or a separation, so the women are worshiping on this side and the men are in this side. And I just thought, well, okay, I got a guy. He's on that side. Well, that wasn't enough. And I kept trying to figure out how to get on the other side up at the front where the rabbi was. That never happened. And then God's like, I got something for you. And then boom, this vision of Jesus moved me into the Christian community. And then all of a sudden, I'm in ministry. But it's not at all how I had envisioned it. Marry the guy, figure out how to get on the other side of the mechitza, and God's like, no, we got another plan here. So, okay, I'm glad, Bessie, that it wasn't enough. I'm glad you didn't settle and that you paid attention to that call. That's good, because there are women listening today and who are going to listen in the future that are wondering, am I called? What do I do about this? Is it okay? And there are going to be men listening that have daughters and wives, and and like really wanting to support. So I'm glad we're telling these stories. Jacqui, tell us about you and your call to ministry. I mean, we knew at second grade you're going to be queen of the world. But like, how did the ministry calling come?
Well, it's interesting that the calling had always been there in terms of community. My mom was a block captain, so I was very comfortable in engaging in community and community needs. So, regardless of what it was, if I was on the ground and I was looking at community, I really lived into that space where God provides. So, in my corporate environment, in my corporate setting, we would be in partnership with communities. So whenever my company whoever was working for wanted something in community, they'd say, send Jacqui as our representative. She connects with the people. She's right there at street level and she's good. Well, in 1992, the General Conference was meeting, and Rodney King, that whole experience of LA and all those things. So they responded by launching a ministry called Shalom Zone. And so I was one of the first persons, laity at that time, to be trained to do Shalom Zone ministry. And it's a 4-block radius looking at how we connect with our communities. So during that time as a consultant, I was invited to help vision for my conference and knew there was a nudging. And one of my clients, one of the church leaders kept saying, why won't you answer your call? I said, I'm good. I'm really good. I'm doing what God, I'm right here on the ground. I mean, I'm good.
Right.
And so I had moved from corporate to nonprofit, and he kept saying, there's something else that you're supposed to be doing. And like Bessie, at 36, something was nudging and pushing, and I kept saying, you know, I have an MBA. I mean, I'm doing entrepreneur work. I'm here on the ground. I'm serving people. I'm good. And I wasn't good.
Yeah.
And I continued to do grants and grant development. And so I was invited to write this grant. And as I was writing it, I could see myself living it as a beloved community leader, gathering people together, transforming ways in which we lived in community, breaking down walls and barriers. I mean, I could see everything that I was writing. And so when I had a chance to be part of the grant that was, we received it, they asked me, would I be willing to do the program manager's position in the grant? So I said, oh, this is really great. Well, as soon as I got there, the gentleman that I was the pastor that I was, serving his church, being his consultant, he gets promoted to the executive director, the pastor that's over this area. First thing he does, he sends me an invitation that says, what happens when the call comes?
Whoa.
I'm officing with him in a different location. I read it. I file 13. Well, he calls me and says, did you register for that event? I said, and here again, bold leadership, truthful leadership. I said to him, I read it. I thought it was a really nice invitation, but I'm good. I'm really good at what I'm doing. I said, so I filed 13 and I'm praying for whoever else is supposed to respond to that call. And he says, I thought you might do that. So God told me to go ahead and register both of us for the event.
That's so great.
And so I'm sitting there. And so from that point to the time I went to seminary, it took me 3 years because the person who was the presenter said, you'll come to that place where you think about and you'll meditate and you'll pray about, are there any things that I still need to do? He says, do all those things. He says, but when God catches you, you're caught for life. You will have ran out of the time that you can keep running.
That's beautiful. When God catches you, you will be caught
for life.
Wow.
And so I was caught, and it was really, and so even when I entered seminary and I began the call piece, I was reluctant to take a charge. I was reluctant. I said, I have got to finish seminary because if I detour off of any of this, I'm bound to, not stick with it. And God kept saying, no, you're called for life and I got you. And I have you and I will provide for you and I will make a way out of it. And you are going to live fully. But here's the real funny part. The first charge in the United Methodist Church, my territory as a salesperson selling oil and gas, when the DS calls and says, do you know where this city is? I could not even say to him, I've never heard of that city. I mean, come on, don't know anything about it. I knew exactly where it was because I sold gas up the street from where this church was located. I sold industrial gas. So my second Sunday in the pulpit, I put on a hard hat and my steel toe shoes because 60% of my congregation either worked in a plant, somebody worked in a plant, somebody was an educator. And so when I walked into the pulpit, they were like, whose hard hat does she have on? Well, with my name etched on the back, it obviously it was mine.
That's amazing.
And I was the first second woman serving that congregation. So you had to break through the stereotype.
Yep, absolutely.
And you had to preach to them and be on the ground with them. But at the same point, they were not thrilled about a woman in their pulpit.
Yeah. I was the first woman in 2 out of the 3 congregations I served. Jacqui, how many times were you the first woman?
4.
4 out of how many?
I wasn't either. I was the first or second in 4. The first appointment, I was the second woman. The next charge, I did a new church start. So, I launched that. The next one, I was the first woman elder to serve in that congregation. And they had had a local pastor, but they had never had a woman elder to be appointed. And then the fourth appointment, I was, it was an experience of being in College Station. A lot of mixed environment, but the home of the Aggies, and really an amazing kinds of different relationships between all churches and all outreach ministries. But again, I wasn't just the first woman serving in the Methodists, but across the board in many of these congregations, they had not had a woman. So after I got there, it opened the door for other women in leadership.
Absolutely.
Right. So when I would step into the pulpit, there were people who were like,
and for me, it's
wait 1 second, Bessie. I think our voices crossed over because of broadband. But Jacqui, what was that last thing you just said?
I was saying when I stepped into the pulpit as the woman in this community, there were lots of people that said, "Oh, that's that woman," because there weren't women Baptist pastors, but soon there were others, and then there weren't women that were accepting their call to ministry in other denominations. But as I got there and they experienced it during the time I was there, other women began to say yes to God.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Bessie, what about you? Tell us, how many times were you?
Right. It was almost for the first 4 appointments, I was the first woman in all of those appointments, from the campus ministry to 2 appointments in Kentucky to an appointment in Alabama. So I was the first woman in all of those appointments, which again, comes with, a few concerns. But I think, even during that time, understanding the call to ministry and staying there, having the conversation with the congregants, but helping them to understand that, this, concern that they may have, that I would always say, I apologize, but I think you're going to have to take that up with God. But I got work to do, because I'm clear that God has called me to this ministry for this time. And so it was always that for me. I found a way to try to push those things aside, understanding that God had called, because I shared a little bit about, just this call over an 18-year period. But during that time in 2001, I had a child who was very ill, 1-pound baby, had 17 surgeries, hydrocephalus, you name it. And so it was a very hard journey, but it was also during that time, I came out of that into ministry, really, and answered the call to ministry. So for me, it was even that whole thing we talk about, this inner awakening, that when you have a child, or when you get so close to death and you come out of that, you come out of it with a new perspective, and not so consumed with, how you feel and what you don't want to do. Because I've said so many times, God, you don't have to worry. You don't have to keep this on me, because I don't want to be in ministry. I don't want to preach. I don't want to be a pastor. I don't, and it never went away. And I think the experiences, with being at home, because I was working as a teacher at the time, I stopped completely for about 6 years. Stayed at home, had another baby at the time who came early, and stayed at home. And so for me, it was, I'm thinking I'm going to be a mom, and I'm just going to, be here with them, 24/7, and get them up and going. And it was when I got them up and going that, that God blessed them to, the older one blessed her to get through uh, this diagnosis, and she was doing well. And I just remember, some promises that I made. Lord, if if you
Uh-oh.
help me out, you bless this baby, and you do, Lord, I'll honor your call. I'll do what you need me to do. And so all of a sudden they were up and out and, in kindergarten and gone. And then I'm sitting there like, okay, so what do you do now? And I said, okay, well, I'll go. And I became a development director at one of our United Methodist missions. Again, still trying to do this work, still trying to run from the call, still trying to get around, and not honoring the call. Thought that would be enough. I'm a development director. I'm in the most impoverished, area here in Kentucky. I'm making a difference. I'm raising money for all of these families. Lord, can this be it?
Oh my
I
God.
really have to respond to this call to ministry. So, yeah, yeah.
Well, Bessie, have all your ministries, how many of your ministries have been cross-cultural?
I have had twice. So in Kentucky, in Lexington, I was an assistant pastor at a huge white church there.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I did that for a while. And then we came to Frankfort, Kentucky. My husband I was with him. I served as a campus pastor, but then I was also assistant pastor with him in a cross cultural appointment. And
Mm,
so, but and the good thing about, when I think about my life, I grew up primarily in an African American setting.
okay.
But it has always, the pulling or something on me has always been that, that God has called us to be kingdom people. So I was always open to the possibility of being in a cross cultural, cross racial appointment.
Yeah.
Simply to learn and to understand more about people, because again, I was in a primarily African American setting, high school, went to HBCU initially. And so when I went to graduate school in a very diverse environment, that was beautiful, a beautiful experience for me. So it has always been something that has been a part of the call as well, that I'm passionate about what I do in the
Yeah.
African American community. But at the same time, I have that same passion for bringing all God's people together. And I think this position is just ideal for me, in the
Mhm.
work that I do now, looking at multi-ethnic ministries from all, different areas. And it's been beautiful just to learn other cultures and what to say and how to say it and
Yeah.
not to say, and to be in that environment. So it's been
Yeah.
a beautiful, beautiful journey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so neat, that cross-cultural, the learning, the richness, the being part of humanity that
Right,
happens there.
right,
So cool. Jacqui, what
right.
about you? How many of your ministry settings have been cross-cultural?
My ministry settings, serving as the directors, roles with discipleship ministries and serving,
Mhm.
and definitely in this role, cross cultural because they're serving both the annual conference and the broader churches. Um, my pastoral assignments have been involved in primarily ethnic communities, but in districts where there was a fair amount of diversity that wasn't being um, cared for necessarily. So whatever committee and leadership, my role in many ways to was to help people. We talk about going and making disciples. Part of my position has been, have you been outside lately? You can read the mission insight report, but have you been outside lately? So keeping it relevant, inviting people to go outside, being in relationship. But I think my cross cultural piece um, has always been how we utilize other means to connect people, whether it's with technology, whether it's community engagement, whether it's um, collaboration. So my strength is really, uh, addressing those critical needs in a community and say, how are we all going to come together? Real quick example. I'd go to churches and they'd always have a food pantry, and I'd say, I really appreciate the fact that we serve the first Saturday every month. So we got 12 Saturdays covered. Okay, so there's 40 other Saturdays. Who are we going to connect with? And I'd go to the community and say, well, why does everybody have to do first Saturday? Can't we partner and collaborate differently? Because those other 40 Saturdays, there's a lot of opportunity here. So my big thing was always to look at being stretched. So, whether it was using, getting on the radio and doing radio ministry, whether it was doing, I launched a church online 14 years ago, and we were still paying for cell phone minutes. So for me, technology and using other tools, and my slogan was meet God at any time. So, I expected people to search out and try to find where that connection was. So for me, cross-racial, cross-cultural, it's, for me, it's like, that's not the box. Because I'm almost what box? I'm talking life. I'm talking community. I'm talking, let's get to know each other. Yes, read the Mission Insight report, but let's dig into it and say, where is the passion?
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't discovering, oh, well, we've got a percentage of this and a percentage of that. I'm like, we got to build community here.
Yeah.
And so I have a different approach in terms of what that cross-racial, cross-cultural, but my thing was being people of God. How do we just connect? And even when you and I connected at School of Congregation Development, that was our conversation, was like, certain walls just don't have to be here.
Yep.
We got more in common ground that we can create. What are we waiting for?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's the gift that God is really is the passion that's in my heart.
I'm just so present to the gift of the two of you and your resourcefulness. That's just the word that comes up, as resourcefulness. And my heart's just in awe, really, of, I don't know, God works in each of our lives so differently. And uniquely is what I mean. Like, each one of us is so unique. And just the two of you, just that sense of resourcefulness is so powerful in this moment. I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful how, you go to these conferences and you meet people. And Bessie, I met you when I came to do some stuff with Oklahoma. You never know who you're going to meet. But then there's always these people. It's like, oh, there's my person. There's my person. And you were talking, Jacqui, about how you would look for, I can't remember exactly how you put it, but you're sort of looking for your sisters and your people, in second grade and third grade and fourth grade. And you were looking for the person you could make contact with. It's like, that's me. That's me. I'm that person. I want to be that person in the room, like, the connector, and especially connecting around diversity and different life experiences. And like that you're known and seen, and who you be matters. I think that's one of my callings and one of my giftings. And I was thinking about, as we sort of begin to wrap up our time, we could talk all day, I think, and listen to each other's wonderful stories. But what and this point in your journey, and there's so much we haven't even heard yet, but what do you think your older self would say to you? Because like Jack, you were talking like, well, both of you would, Bessie, you were talking about like, okay, I'm good. No, both of you said that. I'm good. I don't need this call, whatever this next call is. So I'm just thinking maybe there's another next call that you may not even see yet, or maybe you're like, I don't know, just maybe. And I'm wondering, what would your older self say to you now? If you could hear your older self.
I think for me, Rebecca, it's an integrated self that speaks at many times for me. Because the little girl who got on the bus and was bold and in the fourth grade, you have to think of the window in space. Not only was I on public transportation, but we were in the late 60s. So there are things that I was very attentive and all that. So there was a identity that I had grown into at a very, very young age. So in many ways, I've had to grow into consistency. So the older self really says to me, "You're spot on.
Mm.
Keep praying. Um, don't don't ignore that nudging from the Holy Spirit." So the older person, as well as my younger person, there's an emerging that says, "Keep your eye with God
Mm.
and take care of you,"
Yeah.
because in all of these places, resilience has had a high price.
Mm.
And there are years where I can look and say, my older self would have said, "Jacqui, stop and care for yourself as much as you care for others."
Right.
Mhm.
And so now there's a gentleness. There's not that necessarily that same edginess, but there's a gentleness that has come in that says, "Breathe.
Mm.
Hmm, think about this." Um, but also I've learned to laugh. That 10-year-old on fire girl, she didn't do a lot of laughing. I mean, she was
Mhm.
jokes, but very, very serious. So it took me a while to, you know, breathe and get into a gentleness. So the older one is saying, "That's good, Jacqui. You hang right there for a minute." And then my other last thing I would say, the older one says to me, "Get peace with God's pace. I just
Mm.
need you to be in rhythm with God.
Mm.
Don't rush. We don't have to rush that.
Mm.
So enjoy the journey." So
Mm.
that's where I am.
So beautiful. Thank you to your older self because I got a lot of good stuff from that too. So thank you. Bessie,
Right.
what would your older self say to you?
Right. I think, some of the similar things that Jacqui has shared. I think one of the things I battled breast cancer, and I can almost tell you during that time, when it was taking place, almost knowing before I was diagnosed, because I'd allowed myself to become so stressed with ministry and church and responsibilities as a mother and wife and all the other things as a daughter and all of that. And so I think now when I go back and I look at my life, I think the older self would just say, calm down, to
Mm.
take care of yourself, to know that it's not that serious. God is still on the throne. You're okay. And to be attentive. A lot, I think a lot. I feel like to a certain point that with ministry and throughout these years, many times I've gone more than I should have. And
Mm.
so taking care of myself, self-care is just a priority for me now. But I do think, the just as Jacqui said, the older self, younger self, looking at it as a whole, going back thinking about, because I wasn't the same kind of person Jacqui described. I was a very insecure little girl,
Mm.
and so I would say to myself, at that time, just affirm that I was, that you're beautiful and you're wonderful and you can do it and
Yeah.
hang in there, and all of that. And sometimes I think when I think of my younger self, and I really do, I think a lot of who I am and a lot of what has been that I've been through, whether it's poverty or been insecure or whatever, it makes me very attentive to little girls and people who are around who may have dealt with some of the same insecurities that I dealt with. And so I think, the journey, everything that I've been through now, and I'm so thankful to God that I feel like I get to pour into others along the way, that all of the things that I struggled with, all of the things, the pain that I've encountered and endured, God has placed all of that around me
Mm.
that I can speak into. And so I think I would just consistently, and what I do now, that you're good, you're okay.
Yeah.
Follow your heart. You prayed about it. Know that God is leading, God is doing it, and it's okay. You're okay. To
Mm.
say to myself, you're okay. You're okay.
That's so great, Bessie. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Jacqui, so strong as a young girl, and Bessie a little less self-confident. And I probably came in that area too, a little less self-confident. I grew up in an alcoholic home, parents who loved me, but there was a lot of crazy going on too. And, a lot of drama. And I had to do a lot of self-soothing. And I find that that's still the case. So when I look in the mirror at myself and I want to, have God's wisdom come through, it usually sounds something like, you're okay. You know, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay. And what would my older self say to me? I've been thinking about that. And I think it's something along the lines of, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. If it's in your heart, if God's calling you to it, do it. Just do it. Like, that's what my older self, do it. It's all going to work out. It's all going to work out. And even if it doesn't all work out, it's all going to work out.
It's all going to work out.
It's just all going to work out. Yeah. So that's what comes through me. And I do trust that it's from God, from the Holy Spirit speaking through the older, wiser self. So such a blessing to be with the both of you today. And I thank you for joining me on this really special Leadership Mojo. We're here to empower people in their leadership. And there's nothing like hearing somebody else's story, the highs, the lows, the way God was present, the way we were when we were little kids, what the older self is saying to us. And I really trust that this is a blessing for people. And thank you again to Reverend Dr. Jacqui King for being here, Reverend Bessie Hamilton, soon to be Reverend Dr. Bessie Hamilton. We know and trust that. And and I am Rebecca Simon Peter. And thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us, those that are with us live and those that are going to be watching us later. If you know somebody who could not be here today, but would love to participate in this or just benefit from the resilience that was shared, these women's journeys, please like and share this with them and hit the like button for a reminder before we go live next week. Next week, I'm going to be joined by another wonderful friend and colleague, another woman in ministry, Reverend Lee Goodrich, who will share about how community partnerships have allowed her church to become solvent, among other wonderful things in the midst of the pandemic. Tell me that's not a miracle. So thanks again for being here. We bless you. And we love you. I especially love these live Leadership Mojo times to share my heart with you and to empower and encourage you in the pandemic and the post-pandemic. Be watching for moving the church forward, forging a new path, moving the church forward in a post-pandemic world. And again, I'm Rebecca Simon Peter. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time. Take care, women. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye for now.